Every so often on No Pun Included, we review these big Kickstarter, I want to say games, but really they're kind of more like dreams. Anyway, Cloudspire is the most ridiculous one of them all. I am tremendously glad that I have a copy of Cloudspire because I think I've discovered the cause and source of global warming. Kill it so humanity can endure, you might say to me, but actually I can't, because much like Skynet, Cloudspire is indestructible. Just about the only two components that have even the most minute traces of paper in this game are the cardboard box, which feels as thick as the cap on a Doc Martens, and the rulebook, which I've tossed away, accidentally sat on, and sometimes the dog slept on it, and it still looks better than this morning's newspaper. The rest is made from plastic, neoprene, and yours and mine favorite, plastic. Why, you might ask? Well, as the legend goes, publisher Chip Theory Games has decided to never publish a game that isn't entirely waterproof. Which I don't get, but whatever, let's check this out. Well, that was fun. This is absolutely ridiculous. But before we go on, let me just indulge myself and show you a couple more things. Cloudspire offers an optional expansion that costs $65 and comes in a box that is larger than the game itself, and it's not a small game to begin with. And when you open that box, all you find inside are these gnarly, large, plasticky towers, and all they do in this game is they let you rest a poker chip on top. Some poker chips in this game are spires, and these are so that they actually look like spires. And what about an optional playmat that is so large that it could actually fit one entire Elaine inside of it? The playmat is made of neoprene. The tiles that you put on that playmat are also made of neoprene, making this the first board game in the world that offers you neoprene on neoprene action. And that is probably, if you pardon the term, every board gamer's wet dream, but only in the sense that neoprene is the material that swimsuits are made of. We tend to give these Kickstarter dreams a big shake to see how much nonsense falls out, because dreams tend to be not very coherent. And Cloudspire, take Cloudspire's setting. On the surface, it's typical fantasy stuff. In a fractured land, mystical races fight for the control of source or whatever. But take one closer look and we find ourselves in something uncanny. Popular fantasy is frequently aspirational. Heroes look heroic because they're embodiments of everything we wish we could escape to. Whereas in Cloudspire, heroes look like Darb, which is, I mean, it sounds what it sounds like, but I'm pretty sure it's just Brad spelled backwards. Unit names in Cloudspire take on even more jarring naming conventions. There's people called Joust and Dispatch, which my brain just can't quite handle because all of those are verbs and not nouns, and even when they are nouns, they're not people nouns, they are thing nouns or event nouns. Why? Why is this person called Joust? How does that make any sense? Why is this hero called Keem? Is that a reference to that horrible person from the internet? Or were the people making this just not aware? And you might find this surprising, but this is precisely why Cloudspire fascinates me. It's odd and disjointed. It's a square peg trying to fit a round hole inside of my brain. And I find it all, you're not going to believe it, very compelling. Okay, so let's talk about what Cloudspire actually is, as in, it's a MOBA, which for those of us over 30, it's a video game thing where you have heroes, minions, they fight, you try to destroy their core. I sound so old, don't I? If there's something board games absolutely excel at, is taking a concept that's been very much the zeitgeist 5 years ago, and overanalyzing it to the point of embarrassment. Meanwhile, all the kids have moved on to something called Fork Knife, and I'm reliably told that that's a game about a ninja, which is great because now us adults can talk. Forget about ninjas for a second, this is what you need to know about Cloudspire. Whilst there's more than one way to play this game, its primary mode is 1 versus 1. Each player will pick a faction out of 4 available in the base game, spend 2 hours utterly overwhelmed by actual dozens of abilities and units they have, and then pitch them against each other. Here on my side of the map, I have a hero, I have some minions, I even have spires, and all my things are represented by poker chips, and their health is represented by poker chips underneath them, which is great because when you inevitably fluff it up, you can at least pretend to play it cool, like you're Mads Mikkelsen in Casino Royale. Your goal is simple. You want your units to trudge to the other side of the map and destroy the enemy fortress. The problem, your opponent wants to do the same. What inevitably ends up happening is a bloodbath in the middle of the map. Of course, if some of your units manage to survive that bloodbath, they might even make their way towards the enemy gate and do it some damage. And here's where matters get complicated. Your heroes, represented by a gold outline, have free will and can travel however they want. Your minions, outlined with a bronze circle, are semi-automated and try to always get closer towards the enemy fortress. But the trick is, as long as they advance even a little bit closer and move their full speed, that is a legal move. And this is where this becomes almost like a hexagonal chess puzzle as you try to figure out optimal moves, because of course you can manipulate space with other minions or sometimes your even own ingenuity. But instead of moves like your rook can move diagonally, you end up with moves like, and I'm going to read this, before or after this unit's movement, you may construct a dispatch platform on an adjacent source well, ignoring influence restrictions, promote an adjacent dispatch platform to a siege tower, keeping existing upgrades, or add an upgrade to an adjacent spire, ignoring upgrade restrictions. This has no cost and is in addition to your 2 limited build options. If this unit is on its basic side, return it to your barracks. If it is promoted, flip it to its basic side. There's 13 more of these just on this page alone, and then of course there's the other page as well. Let's talk about these factions then, and let's talk about what makes Cloudspire brilliant. It is by far not the only board game to be emulating the MOBA genre. In the past we've covered Guards of Atlantis, which is as fast as it is ruthless and understands that this genre is all about split-second decisions and clever navigation of your hero. So what does Cloudspire do instead? It focuses on the surface level understanding of MOBA and chooses to emulate the minions turgidly move to the other side to experience a long and protracted death aspect of the genre. And then, just to make sure that things don't feel too speedy, did I mention how many units and abilities and upgrades and buildings every faction has? Look, it might sound like I'm making fun, but sometimes the smartest thing you can do is zagging when everyone zigs. And whilst the entirety of the board game industry is focused on streamlining experiences, Cloudspire leans the other way. Hard. Just a quick interruption to remind viewers that we've just launched our Patreon campaign. Videos like these take an enormous amount of work, and if you appreciate all that we do for this hobby, please help us keep going. There's all sorts of lovely perks, like our wonderfully crafted newsletter, which the first one should be going up pretty soon, but you'll also get access to all of the past campaign's newsletters, and that is quite a read. Plus, if you pledge at a higher level, you'll get access to our uncut audio logs, of which the first one is already up, and I talk about World of Warcraft, which is a whole thing. I tie it into how and why I appreciate board games. You have to give it a listen. Thank you for considering supporting us. These are the Heirs faction, whom are birds, and heirs sound like air, so that's what they did here. Anyway, some heir units have this talent called Elfin. What does it do? It spawns an Elfin Kaze unit that you place on top of the unit that spawned it. Sounds simple, right? Well, let's have a look at some other talents in this game. First, we have the Elfin Kaze itself, which amongst other talents has the Roost Roam talent. What does that do? Well, I'm gonna paraphrase, but basically it means that the Elfin Kaze does not have a movement value of its own. Instead, whenever it wants to move, it has to check the Roost value, which is, by the way, not the Roost Roam talent on a unit it is either currently perching on or was perched on a previous turn. Additionally, and I can't believe I remember all of this, if it starts its turn not on top of a unit that has a Roost talent, it then either has to spend its entire turn moving and sit and perch on a unit that has the Roost talent, or use the Save or Glide Bomb talents. What are Save or Glide Bomb talents? I am glad you asked. When an Elfin Kaze deploys, it can deploy on one of two sides. One side has the Save, another has the Glide Bomb talent, and then based on which side you choose, that is the talent you're going to have. When does it deploy? It deploys at the start of the Onslaught phase on top of the unit that has the Elfin talent, but only if that unit is not grouped underneath another unit. And we will talk about grouping much later. Got that? Okay, because this is just stuff that's listed on your faction sheet under talents and summarized nowhere. Once you actually attempt to employ all of these rules that you tried and failed to memorize, all kinds of other questions creep up. Like, for example, hey, if I have to place this unit on top of the other unit, do they count as grouped? Because that's what you normally do to grouped units. No, they're entirely separate and individual units. But if it is placed on top of another unit and it's a separate unit, can it still attack another unit? Yes. But can it be attacked by another unit? Yes. But hey, if it's placed on top, doesn't it mean it has to activate first and then is forced to use its movement value to move off of that unit? No, it doesn't have to do that. And that's just half the questions I had when I started playing, and I had to go and look for answers deep in the bowels of the dark realm that is FAQs. Not to mention the immense amount of discomfort I had to endure fully realizing that the publishers decided it was okay to name this unit Elfin Kaze when the glide bomb ability is basically launching themselves in flight at the enemy, and I mean, you get it, right? And that's board games for you. And you know what? Yeah, these rules are absolutely ridiculous, but at the same time, they open up a play space I've not seen anywhere else. These Elfin Kazes don't just have to roost on units, they can also roost on certain spires, making this battlefield into a Rube Goldberg machine made out of minds, and one wrong move from your opponent could entirely annihilate them. I missed. And that's just one way you can outfit your faction. Since you start each game clean from the beginning, there's more strategies and secrets to discover here than in your creepy aunt's loft. This is just a treasure trove full of ideas, and you can't wait to dive in. And much like a swimming pool, you can't stay inside for too long because then you'll drown, so instead you keep bobbing in and out through a sea of plastic. Conceptually, Cloudspire reminds me of Spirit Island, a game with a vast array of possibilities and interactions that twist your brain in that delightful way each time you're forced into a problem. And so very rarely do we get a Kickstarter game that's visually indulgent, but also translates that indulgence into raw rules rambunctiousness. And the thing is, I am becoming increasingly aware as this video goes on that I did title it 50% genius and 70% disaster, but I can't stop making it sound like 10% genius and 100% disaster. So trust me when I say that there is a lot that compels me here, but the reason I can't stop making it sound like, well, frankly, a car crash is because ideas need a vehicle. And for lack of a better analogy, this is an elephant riding a bicycle. No matter how much I twist and turn Cloudspire, I can't stop making the conclusion that this should have never been a competitive game. And there are not one, but two big reasons for that. A lot of reviewers have panned Cloudspire for being dull and boring because a large part of the game feels automated. Let me give you a clearer idea of how that works. Each game of Cloudspire is split into 4 waves, and each wave is split into 6 phases: event, income, market, build, prep, and onslaught phases. At the start of the prep phase, you'll get a set number of CP, one of the game's 2 resources. You can spend that CP on recruiting minions and heroes that you'll send out for the wave. And then you'll stack these units in what can only be described as a monolith of chips. And the order you stack them in is the cornerstone decision of each wave, because it's going to determine how that wave plays out for you. For example, if you stack something that's very slow at the top of the stack, it's going to create a traffic jam, forcing everyone else to lag behind, which could be a great strategy if you have something particularly resilient in the front, or terrible if your opponent has units that can deal with big clumps, such as the aforementioned Elfin Kaze or the Brawnen siege towers that have the splash talent. And I understand how to some it might feel monotonous to follow up this largely silent and self-involved phase with the onslaught phase, where minion movement is semi-prescribed. But the key word here is semi. If my upgraded Battleborn has to move 3 spaces, then sure, I could make him go all the way down this path, but why would I want him to land near this enemy spire of death? I could instead just do this 1, 2, 3 little zigzag, and because I ended further to the gate than I was before, that is a perfectly fine move. The old adage is very much true here. Restriction breeds creativity. I never felt constricted. Instead, each turn presented itself with opportunities to outpace, outmaneuver, and outblunder my opponents, because even in this heavily scripted movement system, the opportunities to make mistakes were not only inevitable, but also quite comical. And let's not forget that you can group units together, meaning you can conjoin one unit underneath the other. When those 2 units move, they move as one, and all the health chips and stats belong only to the top unit. However, when that unit dies, it reaches into its pocket and through the magic of Pokeballs unleashes an entirely new one. What Pokemon is that? It's Rocket Raccoon? Hello, it's this Marvel Studios. I think a board game is trying to infringe on your intellectual property. Hello? Hello? The tactical web this system creates has nearly limitless branching paths, and I absolutely renounce any proclamation that this phase is dull or scripted. Here's problem number 1. None of that matters. Let's get a little philosophical. The problem isn't so much in game balance or its mechanisms, it's that it is once again an elephant trying to ride a bicycle. The ethos of head-on competitive games is to compete, to outsmart your opponent, and the appeal is in the little details. I selected units that counter my opponent's units. I maneuvered carefully to create a trap. All of that is well and present in Cloudspire, but it's buried under so much clutter that I don't think it's realistic that most people will get there. If you are there, if you are playing Cloudspire competitively with your friends and you're really digging into it, kudos to you. I suspect you are in a very small minority. I'm gonna make an educated guess and say that probably a majority of folks are gonna bounce off of this faster than people ran away from the Sonic movie after its first trailer. If you bought this, if you own the cavalcade of neoprene and plastic, it's easy to see yourself indulge in layers and layers of minutia. But if the financial and emotional burden isn't forced upon you and you're not asked to unravel this, I'm going to invoke the layered onion analogy. I know it's tired, but I just think it's going to make most people cry. And you might call this hyperbole, but I know that it's not hyperbole, because this is what happened to Elaine when I was first teaching her how to play this game. This is about 85% into the teach, and I did not say anything even remotely funny. And you know what? I'm not at all surprised by that reaction because our first game was a hot air balloon filled with blunders. And whilst it was quite a close fight, we probably got about 30% of the rules wrong. So none of that held any weight to even start to begin understanding the strategies inherent to each faction, like what units to select and what units counter other units. You have to play 4 games with each faction. That's 16 games before you and your friends can start going. And by the way, to convince Elaine to play more games of Cloudspire after the first one, I had to remind her that it was, in fact, her job. So, I don't know, maybe you could pay your friends money or something. That's problem number 1. Problem number 2, and you'll have to forgive me for what is very basic board game critique, but this deterministic game of raw attack values and movement numbers is really random. Chip theory games have clearly created a game that's complex and varied and highly mutable. But what's inevitable about systems like these that add little exceptions and by rules that all create new abilities is that people will be able to create powerful and potent moves that are hard to anticipate. And the fun part of these games is figuring out how to challenge these powerful combinations. In Cloudspire, you can't do that. Because all unit selection happens in a separate phase and simultaneously, there's just no way of knowing if the Neuroran player is about to unleash some deadly contraption from its cornucopia of chips. The FAQ does clarify that you can wait and see what the person in turn order before you has selected, but ask yourself, in a game that can easily take 3 hours, do you really want to be the person that makes it drag out even longer? Anyway, that's just one of the ways that this game is chaotic and unpredictable, but the real culprit is this. Say hello to the event deck. Yes, the event deck, which just like in many other games is bullshit. Except in this one, it's extra bullshit. At the start of waves 2, 3, and 4, you will draw a card from the event deck and resolve it. The problem is that sometimes it is such a limp alteration to the state of affairs that is barely worth the physical effort of actually drawing a card, and sometimes it's so drastic that you might as well concede because that one card appended your entire game. You know, I normally wouldn't even bring this up anymore. Event decks are just very dull elements that most designers use as a crutch to prop up an unexciting game. But not only does Cloudspire not need this crutch, I'd argue that the people at Chip Theory Games very much know it's bullshit. Because in the solo and co-op variants, this deck is excised. Because if they didn't remove it from the game, then those puzzles would collapse. I wouldn't recommend Cloudspire's competitive mode to anyone because it's just an exercise in frustration, and no, it's actually just frustration. But that doesn't mean that I wouldn't recommend Cloudspire at all. Surprise! Remove this burdening shell of competitive clutter, and what you find underneath is a delightful cooperative or solo game that only adds 6 or so pages of rules to the already voluptuous rulebook. Again, I know this sounds like a backhanded compliment, I just don't want people to think that in its solo or co-op modes, Cloudspire is somehow less gargantuan, and gargantuan it is because each faction gets 4 solo scenarios, meaning that there's a total of 16 of them in this booklet, 20 if you count the solo scenarios for the 5th faction called Grige, plus there's 10 different co-op scenarios, making a total of 30 different games you can play. To bring back the chess analogy, all these scenarios remind me very much of chess problems you'd find in the crossword section of the newspaper. Each of these is a different gauntlet that poses a challenge that you and sometimes your friend have to overcome together. But unlike chess, there's once again 17,000 different abilities. However, in this context, it is actually a welcoming treasure trove of ideas and tools to express your creativity. Think of Cloudspire like a paintbrush, but for people who instead of paint use sentences like I'm going to give my hero a +1 attack upgrade so it can defeat a joust without being retaliated. Better yet, because each scenario is a different kind of problem, it asks you to use different tools. Now that there's no opportunity to mess up and make a 3-hour game wonky for my opponent, trying new strategies started to feel rewarding. If these factions are meant to be realized in multiple ways, then this module is the one that makes it shine, and you don't have to take my word for it. Elaine, would you play Cloudspire cooperatively again?
Yes.
I rest my case. Worth noting that we only played Cloudspire solo once live on a Twitch stream, and I got trounced harder than someone who gets trounced very hard. Look, it's late in the script, I was running out of analogies, but even though I lost horribly, I could immediately see a number of different strategies and approaches I could use to attempt the puzzle again. Yes, it was confusing as all heck, and yes, I frequently got lost as to whose turn it was or which step we were on, but I thought the puzzle was interesting, challenging, and most importantly, I want to go back and beat it so bad. Mostly, I'm left questioning why wasn't Cloudspire primarily a cooperative game to begin with? It's certainly packaged and sold like one, more of a product for people who like to own things, and then it can sit as the phantasmagorical pride of their collection. And the only answer I can come up with is that I think that as many things that become much bigger than they ever should, they started with an idea, and as it grew and matured, maybe people making it didn't realize that that idea needed adjusting. Maybe tabletop MOBA games aren't meant to be this big and also competitive. And maybe that's something that's easy to see in hindsight, but I can imagine that it's equally easy to lose yourself whilst making something like this. I'm just glad that the cooperative and solo modes exist because I'm more than happy to return to them. And if all of this convinced you that Cloudspire might have a spot in your board game collection, the bad news is that you can't buy it, but not to worry, a recent Kickstarter campaign for an expansion offered the game and all of its various gubbins. And even though the campaign is over, you can still make a late pledge. The only problem is you actually have to buy into the new expansion to access the pledge manager. As for what other expansions I would recommend, strangely, I'd point to the aesthetic ones first. The upgraded health poker chips are so much more pleasing to handle, and I don't know if you heard, board games are tactile experiences, and as much as I made fun of the giant box of plastic that is the Spires, I am very glad I have them. Not only do they make the Spires stand out, but they help identify their stats at a quick glance. And the gameplay expansions, well, they add extra factions, extra market chips, extra landmark chips, extra event cards, extra rally cards. All of those are fine, but there's already so much game in the base box that it will take you a year to get through all of it, or 2 months if you're quarantined and bored. If you want more of a deep dive on the solo mode, you can definitely listen to the Game Brain podcast. The relevant episode is linked in the description. And my oh my, please do a pledge on our Patreon. It would really, really help. And we're 2/3 towards our goal, and it would be really nice to get to it towards the end of May, because then we can feel safe and financially secure about the future of No Pun Included. And wouldn't that be nice? Almost forgot one final thing. Just wanted to give a shout out to one of our patron backers, Justin Saber, who pledged at the level where they get their own personal patron shout out. It's because of people like Justin that all of this is possible. They make it happen. I'm just gonna leave these to air dry. Get it? Air dry. I'm gonna go now.